everyone. Donald Trump calls it one of the toughest deals of all, but the US president says he is still hopeful that peace can be reached between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Despite the optimism, troubles back at home are not going away. Mr. Trump made a historic visit to the Western Wall in Jerusalem, the first sitting U.S. president to ever do so. He also met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said for the first time in his life he sees a, quote, real hope for change. Let's go to Jerusalem now, and senior White House correspondent Jim Acosta is standing by. Very interesting to hear President Trump, Jim, say that it's going to be one of the toughest deals of all. After months ago, he said, it may not be as difficult as people have thought.
Indeed, Amber and Michael, the president is trying to change the narrative back home by showing off some of these alliances that he's building up here in the Middle East, but he is finding ways to step on his message. He did that earlier today when he was talking with the Israeli prime minister and was asked for an explanation as to why he shared Israeli intelligence with top-level Russian officials earlier this month. It was an explanation that did not add up. President Trump is discovering it's not so simple to bring the art of the deal to the Holy Land. After suggesting Middle East peace might be easy just weeks ago, the president acknowledged what his predecessors have known for decades. It's not.
I've heard it's one of the toughest deals of all, but I have a feeling that we're going to get there eventually. I hope.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. Even as Mr. Trump continued this photo op-rich foreign trip by becoming the first sitting U.S. president to visit one of Judaism's holiest sites, the Western Wall, he is doing damage control with his Israeli hosts. The president appeared to confirm that he had recently shared classified Israeli intelligence with top-level Russian officials with this misleading explanation.
I never mentioned the word or the name Israel. Never mentioned it during that conversation. They were all saying I did. So you had to know the story wrong. Never mentioned the word Israel.
The problem is those news reports never stated the president mentioned Israel by name in that meeting with the Russians. While some in the administration insist there's no need for apologies,
I don't know that there's anything to apologize for.
Others are conceding some reassurances may be helpful.
We're trying to reassure all of our counterparts that what they tell us is kept, trusted, and valued, and we will return the favor.
But the president and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are both touting their strong ties with sharp criticism of the Iran nuclear deal that was crafted by the Obama administration.
But it was a terrible thing for the United States to enter that deal. And believe me, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, that I can tell you.
Still, the president has yet to follow through on his campaign promise to tear up the nuclear agreement.
I think that agreement is a disaster for this country, for Israel, for the Middle East.
And that's not the only contradiction from this trip. Contrast the president's rhetoric on Islam from the campaign trail.
I think Islam hates us.
With the softened language the president used in Saudi Arabia.
There is still much work to be done. That means honestly confronting the crisis of Islamic extremism and the Islamicists and Islamic terror of all kinds.
The president slipped and said Islamic terror instead of Islamist terror, the White House said, because he is, quote, exhausted. But top administration officials who danced the night away with the Saudis are stepping around that comment.
He's doing better than I am, and he's got a few years on me.
Now, the president is about to find out that the bargaining will get much tougher with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. He will meet with Abbas tomorrow here in Israel, up in Bethlehem. And meanwhile, we should also point out that the president, while he will have one of his top advisors, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, by his side, he will continue this foreign trip without other top officials traveling with him. His chief of staff, Ryan Priebus, and his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, both left over the weekend. They're now back at the White House. Michael and Emma.
Several more stops to go on this 9-day trip. Jim Acosta, appreciate you live for us there in Jerusalem. All right, let's talk more now about the renewed effort for peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Joining us now from Jerusalem, Nathan Thrall, a senior analyst with the Middle East program at the International Crisis Group, also the author of The Only Language They Understand, Forcing Compromise in Israel and Palestine, which I read on the weekend, and it's a terrific read. Nathan, I mean, I don't know about you. I've been going there since the late 80s. Is there any reason to believe that President Trump is going to have success where so many others have not, given the dynamics as they continue to exist?
Well, there's extraordinary skepticism on both sides that Trump can achieve anything. But at the same time, there's extraordinary fear on both sides because Trump is so unconventional. They fear that there's a chance that he could do something no U.S. president before has done. And so there is some nervousness about what Trump might do.
Yeah, and speaking of unconventional, we saw President Trump there in Jim Acosta's piece where he took it upon himself to deny that he ever mentioned Israel when he met with Russians in the Oval Office last week. Over this intelligence breach incident, how much trust was lost? What's the damage that's been done between the U.S.-Israeli relationship?
I think that to the extent that the reporting on that breach is accurate, that very little damage was done. And we saw immediately that the Israeli reaction, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. put out a statement shortly afterward and said U.S.-Israeli intelligence cooperation will continue and has a bright future. And I don't think that Israel is going to make too much of a stink about it.
President Rivlin said, you know, his quote, I think, was, "America is back." I mean, I'm wondering what you thought of that. What do you think he meant by that? I mean, America never really left. What is it that he's saying about Donald Trump that's, I don't know, different?
Well, I think he's expressing the hope of many in the region, particularly the Sunni Arab states with whom Trump just met, and also of Israel, that the U.S. policy will be toward re-engagement and toward confrontation with Iran in particular. There was a sense under Obama that the U.S. was pulling out of the region, which, of course, was very exaggerated. The U.S. has a heavy presence here. But there was a sense that the U.S. was no longer prioritizing the Middle East, and that after the bloody nose in Iraq, it really was trying to avoid entanglement there as much as possible. And the Sunni states very much want that to change under Trump and are hopeful that it will, and Israel wishes the same.
Basically, President Trump said pretty much everything, you know, whatever Israel wanted to hear. It was music to their ears, especially as he slammed Iran repeatedly on this trip. I mean, does President Trump's stance on Iran help increase chances for a peace deal? Because you had Netanyahu saying that it would help propel the possibility of reconciliation and peace between Israel and a lot of folks.
Well, there's great hope in Israel that the common interest between Israel and Sunni Arab states in confronting Iran could lead to a new, what is called a regional initiative, or essentially a new Israeli-Palestinian peace process that's supported by some of the Arab states. And that there's a great deal of hope that what would happen if such a process were to start is that the Arab states would start to normalize their relations, not fully, but to take steps toward normalization with Israel prior to Israel having reached peace with the Palestinians. Previously, the position of the Arab states had been that they were ready for full peace with Israel as soon as it had made peace with the Palestinians, meaning withdraw fully from the West Bank. If Israel is able to get out of Trump and the Arab states some steps toward normalization without really giving much to the Palestinians, then that'll be an enormous victory for Israel, and it won't necessarily increase the chances of a peace agreement. In fact, you could argue it would do the opposite, because it would reduce Israel's incentives to give anything to the Palestinians once they'd already achieved in advance of that peace what they wanted from the Arab states.
And that regional idea has been around for a while with the Gulf states. I'm curious, when it comes to the Israelis and the Palestinians specifically, it's one thing to talk about talks. And do you think the U.S., though, needs to come up with a concrete proposal of its own, a true framework on where to go now, because the previous plans haven't worked, and for that matter to have consequences if the parties don't comply with the framework, whatever it is?
Yes, I think that's really the only chance that Trump has at reaching an agreement is if he could break with the U.S. foreign policy establishment, which he seems to be willing to do in some areas, and to put forward a U.S. proposal of the outlines of an agreement, and really force consequences on each side if they're not to agree to negotiate on the basis of it. That's something that no U.S. president has done before, and it's something that Trump is capable of potentially doing, although it should be said, he is emphasizing, and the administration is emphasizing in all their statements, that they won't do that. They keep using the words, "We will not impose a solution," and they describe their own role as that of a facilitator rather than as a mediator. So all of that suggests that they do not want to pressure either of the parties, and without U.S. pressure, there won't be any agreement.
Nathan Thrall, senior analyst with the Middle East Program International Crisis Group. Appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Well,
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Iran's newly re-elected president scoffing at Mr. Trump's first visit abroad.
Yeah, Hassan Rouhani called the gathering of leaders in Saudi Arabia theatrical with no real political value. He's also taking issue with the U.S. president's claim that Iran is the world's biggest sponsor of terrorism.
Mr. Rouhani said Iran is one of the few countries in the region willing to stand up to terrorists.
Mr. Trump came to our region at a time in which the world saw the presence of 45 million Iranian votes at the ballot box within a 24-hour period, yet chose to go to a nation which has never clearly seen the meaning of such elections.
Mr. Rouhani, who's considered a moderate, won a second term Friday, taking in 57% of the vote. And next hour, we will have the president of the National Iranian American Council on our show to talk about his big win and Mr. Trump's visit to the region. We'll have that interview in about an hour from now.